I could still hear the faint echo of laughter in the air, the clinking of champagne glasses, the buzz of a beautiful evening unfolding. My birthday celebration was all it was meant to be: great, lively, packed with family and friends. A celebration of another year well lived, or so I thought. In the middle of it all, she moved forward. My wife. The woman I had built a life with. Trusted. Cherished. She stood at the heart of the gathering, a wicked glitter in her eye, holding out a little, beautifully wrapped box. "A wonderful gift for you," she stated, her voice tinged with something that sounded too much like mischief. I smiled at her, at our visitors, feeling the weight of so many eyes on me. I wasn't sure why, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way she smirked as if she knew something I didn't, or the way some of the guests exchanged nervous glances. But I played along. I pulled down the exquisite wrapper, untied the ribbon, opened the lid. Within was a V-op, white, fresh, unassuming. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper inside, and then I read the words. Instantly, the air around me turned to stone. A DNA test, the kind no father ever wants to see. I scanned the results. My vision blurred. My ears buzzed. My heart pounded so fiercely it almost drowned out the collective gasps rippling across the room. Likelihood of fatherhood, 0%, 0, 0, 0%, like a bullet to the ribs, like a dagger to the spine. I blinked, willing the words to change, hoping, praying that I had misread them. But the black ink on white paper did not lie. I lifted my head. My wife was smirking. "Surprise!" she exclaimed, her voice ringing over the stunned silence. "Thought you should know." The room was deafeningly quiet. Faces twisted in disbelief. Whispers slithered across the air like a disease. My mother gasped. My best friend cursed under his breath. Someone at the back giggled uneasily, unsure if this was some elaborate joke, and then my eyes found him. The son I had raised as my own. The boy I had nursed to sleep, taught to ride a bike, kissed on the forehead before bedtime. His small, innocent face was riddled with confusion. His brows furrowed, his lips slightly parted. He didn't understand. Of course he didn't. He was just a child, not mine. My stomach twisted, a maelstrom of emotions clashing inside me. Wrath, heartbreak, betrayal, humiliation, a gut-wrenching agony that stabbed at my insides. But I did not shout. I did not lash out. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. I placed the paper back inside the box, closed it gently, and laid it down on the table. I grabbed my glass of whiskey, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked at my wife, the woman who had just publicly shattered my world. She was still, beaming, still basking in her moment of triumph, waiting for me to erupt. She wanted chaos. She wanted to see me break. She wanted the gratification of watching me crumble in front of everyone. But I wouldn't give her that. Not tonight. Not ever. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice so steady that a flicker of doubt crossed her face. I could feel the guests holding, their breath waiting for the storm to break. I gave them nothing. I set my glass down, adjusted my cufflinks, and leaned in, just slightly, so that only she could hear my next words. "I appreciate the honesty." And just like that, the power shifted. Her smirk slipped. The confidence in her eyes faltered. She had prepared for my rage. She had rehearsed my fury. She needed a dramatic fallout. But she hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for my silence. She hadn't planned for my calm. She hadn't planned for the possibility that I had known all along. That little box, the gift she had so eagerly handed me, I had already received it months ago. I had already seen those results, gone through the phases of grief, of devastation, long before this moment. She thought this was her move. She had no idea. I had already set the board. I simply stood there, staring at her, watching as that dreadful realization started to dawn. In her eyes, her voice wavered. "Well, what are you planning?" I tilted my head, smiling. "You'll see." And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the party, now unsure of the game she had just started. She was about to lose everything, the illusion of control. She wiped the tears from her face, swallowing down a sob as she tried to compose herself. I could see the wheels spinning in her head. She still believed she had options. That's the thing about individuals like Rachel. They always think they're one step ahead. They always think there's a way out, a way to manipulate, a way to turn things back in their favor. She thought she could fix this. She felt she could salvage something. She thought she could cry, apologize, maybe twist things just enough to win some compassion, but she had no idea that her actual horror hadn't even begun. She took a deep breath and wiped her face with her sleeve. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking but firmer now. "We can work this out." I raised an eyebrow. "Figure this out?" She nodded, forcing a weak, pathetic smile. "I know you're furious. I get it. I wounded you, and I held up a finger, cutting her off. Her lips jerked shut. "Rachel," I replied, slowly lowering my head. "How much money do you have in your account right now?" Her face trembled. "What?" she murmured. I smiled. "Go ahead. Check." She paused, and that's when she noticed her phone was still in her hand. Her fingers hovered over the screen, reluctant, suddenly terrified, afraid of what she might see. But she had to know, so she tapped her banking app, and her face drained of color. Her jaw fell open. Her eyes widened in terror. "Where is my money?" she stuttered, clicking furiously. "Where?" I took another sip of my coffee. "It's gone." She blinked, shook her head as if she had misheard me. "What?" "Gone," I repeated, exhausted. "Frozen," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Her breathing grew shallow. You can't do that." "Oh, but I can," I said with a shrug. And I did. Her fingers clutched the phone tighter. She switched apps. Credit cards, refused, savings, empty, investments, frozen. Her hands began to shake. No, this can't be happening." "Oh, it is," I replied, watching her break apart in real time. She slumped back against the couch, clutching her phone like a lifeline that had just snapped. Tears welled in her eyes. But this time, they weren't for me. They were for herself. She was broke, and she knew it. The reality about power. Rachel had wasted years believing she had control. She spent money freely, made choices irresponsibly, and regarded me like an afterthought. She thought I was just the stable husband in the background, the man she could depend on, the one who would always be there. She thought she was untouchable. But what she failed to comprehend was that she had built her entire life on my foundation. The house, not in her name, the car, leased under my company, the credit cards, approved, under my accounts, the investments, managed by me. Rachel had never been in control. I was. And now she was learning that the hard way. The instant she cracked, she glanced up at me, anguish seeping into her expression. "This isn't fair," she muttered. I let out a brief, frigid laugh. "Fair?" I echoed. "You had a family. You had stability. You had a man who would have done everything for you, and you threw it all away. For what? Some excitement? Some affair?" She opened her lips to answer, but I wasn't finished. "Fair," I continued, getting closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Isn't a game you get to play anymore, Rachel." Her bottom lip quivered. "Please, Daniel. I need anything. I can't be left with nothing." "You should have thought about that before," I stated. Her shoulders fell, the fight drained out of her. because for the first moment she recognized there was no escape, no last-minute cure, no miracle coming to help her. She had played herself, and now she was paying the price. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of her ruin sink over her like a smothering blanket. And then, for the ultimate blow, I slid an envelope onto the table. She trembled. What is it?" I smirked. "Your exit plan." She hesitated. Then, with shaky fingers, she pulled out the contents. Her eyes inspected the paperwork inside, and I watched as the final light of hope left her. Inside the envelope was a one-way plane ticket, a lease termination notice for the residence, a financial settlement proposal. She gasped, staring up at me, in shock. You're kicking me out?" I nodded. "You have 1 week to pack your stuff. After that, I want you gone." Her lips opened, but no words came out, and suddenly she broke into weeping. She cried harder than I had ever seen, because now she understood her former life, over, her money, gone, her reputation, damaged, and I was free. As I turned to go, I paused at the doorway. "You know what the worst part is," I said. She sniffled, looking up at me with crimson, swollen eyes. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "I actually loved you." And with that, I walked away. Because this was never about retribution. This was about justice.